Story number 1. Faces in the Snow. Winter in Scandinavia is a harsh mistress. The cold is biting, the nights interminably long, and the landscape transforms into an ethereal expanse of white that stretches as far as the eye can see. In January of 1969, my friends and I sought refuge from the chaos of our lives by embarking on a camping trip to the remote highlands of Norway. Little did we know, the serene beauty of the snow-covered mountains would conceal horrors that would haunt us forever. I'm Eric Larson, a 25-year-old aspiring writer with a penchant for adventure and a curiosity that often led me into uncharted territories. My companions on this expedition were Lars, my childhood friend and a seasoned outdoorsman; Ingrid, a quiet and introspective artist; and Hans, the joker of our group who could lighten even the darkest moods with his humor. We had all agreed that this trip would be a chance to reconnect with nature, to find inspiration, and to escape the mundanity of our daily routines. We arrived at the base of the highlands on a crisp December afternoon. The sky a pale gray that promised snow. The air was sharp, each breath visible as it mingled with the cold. Our destination was a secluded valley known for its untouched beauty and the solitude it offered. Setting up camp was a familiar ritual, our movements coordinated and efficient as we erected tents, stacked firewood, and unpacked our gear. As night fell, we gathered around a roaring campfire, the flames casting dancing shadows on our faces. Lars shared stories of his previous adventures, while Ingrid sketched the landscape, her pencil moving swiftly across the paper. Hans entertained us with tales of local folklore, his voice rising and falling with exaggerated gestures. The first night was peaceful, the only sounds being the crackling of the fire and the distant howl of a lone wolf. The second day was spent hiking through snow-laden trails, marveling at the untouched beauty that surrounded us. The silence was profound, broken only by the crunch of our boots and the occasional call of a bird. We reached a viewpoint that offered a panoramic vista of the valley below, the snow glistening under the weak winter sun. It was here that I felt a deep sense of tranquility, a moment of perfect harmony with the natural world. That evening, as we settled into our tents, the weather began to change. The sky darkened ominously, the wind picking up speed and sending snowflakes swirling in chaotic patterns around our campsite. We worked quickly to reinforce our tents, securing the flaps and reinforcing the seams against the increasing storm. The temperature plummeted, and the fire in the center of our tent grew dangerously low. Around midnight, the storm reached its zenith. The wind howled like a living entity, rattling our tent with relentless force. It was then that we heard it, a faint, melodic humming that seemed to emanate from the very walls of our shelter. At first, we dismissed it as the wind playing tricks on our ears. But the sound persisted, growing louder and more distinct with each passing minute. "Did you hear that?" Ingrid whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Lars nodded, his face pale. "Probably just the storm. Nothing to worry about." But the humming continued, now accompanied by a soft, rhythmic tapping that echoed through the tent. It was as if someone or something was moving around us, the sound amplifying our unease. Hans tried to lighten the mood, cracking a joke about haunted tents and restless spirits. But his laughter rang hollow in the tense atmosphere. As the night wore on, the sounds intensified, the humming transforming into a mournful melody that seemed to seep into our very souls. The tapping became more deliberate, synchronized with the rhythm of the song. Fear gripped us, each of us feeling the oppressive weight of the unseen presence that surrounded us. Suddenly, the tent shuddered violently, the fabric tearing as if ripped by an invisible force. We scrambled to plug the holes, our hearts racing with terror. The storm outside raged on, the wind now a furious beast that threatened to tear our shelter apart. In the midst of the chaos, the humming ceased abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence that hung heavy in the air. Breathing heavily, we huddled together, trying to make sense of the inexplicable events. It was then that we noticed it, a series of intricate patterns etched into the snow outside our tent. forming what appeared to be human faces. The designs were delicate and precise, each one bearing an uncanny resemblance to the members of our group. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized the faces mirrored our own. Frozen expressions of fear and confusion. "We need to leave," Lars insisted, his voice shaking. "Something's not right here." We packed up our gear in haste. The remnants of our shattered tent a stark reminder of the night's horrors. As we stepped outside, the storm had subsided, leaving behind a blanket of pristine snow that concealed the tracks of our departure. The faces in the snow were gone, replaced by an untouched expanse that seemed to erase any trace of our presence. The journey back was fraught with anxiety, the lingering fear of what we had experienced making every step a struggle against the biting cold. We reached the edge of the valley as dawn broke, the first rays of sunlight piercing through the lingering darkness. Relief washed over us as we made our way back to civilization, our minds haunted by the memory of the faces in the snow and the ominous night we had endured. Days turned into weeks, and the events of that winter night became a source of nightmares and endless speculation among our friends and family. None of us could explain what had transpired, and the lingering sense of being watched never fully dissipated. The faces in the snow remained an enigma, a chilling reminder of the thin veil that separates our reality from the unknown. As time passed, our lives returned to normalcy, but the scars of that trip lingered beneath the surface. I channeled my fear and confusion into my writing, penning stories that attempted to capture the essence of our experience. Lars became more introspective, his once carefree demeanor now tinged with a perpetual wariness. Ingrid's art took on a darker tone, her sketches filled with shadowy figures and ethereal landscapes. Hans, ever the optimist, masked his lingering fears with an unwavering facade of humor. Years later, I still find myself staring at snow-covered landscapes with a sense of unease, the memory of those faces etched into my mind. The highlands of Norway hold secrets that defy explanation, their silent beauty concealing horrors that lie just beyond our understanding. Our encounter on that fateful night serves as a haunting reminder of the mysteries that dwell within the natural world and the fragile boundary between the known and the unknown. Sometimes, when a storm rolls in and the wind carries a familiar, mournful melody, I can't help but feel the presence of those lost faces, their silent cries echoing through the snow-covered pines. It's a chilling reminder that some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, their secrets forever buried beneath layers of ice and shadow. If you ever find yourself venturing into the remote highlands of Scandinavia during the dead of winter, heed the warnings of those who have walked these paths before you. Respect the land, honor its legends, and remember that some nights hold secrets too dark to uncover, their whispers lost in the howl of the wind and the endless fall of snow. Story number 2. The Woman in the Snowstorm. Winter in Wyoming is unforgiving. The mountains, blanketed in thick layers of snow, stretch endlessly, and the fierce storms can turn a serene landscape into a deadly trap. In 1986, my friends and I ventured into this icy wilderness, seeking the thrill of a skiing expedition. We were young, bold, and foolishly unprepared for the darkness that awaited us. Mark, the de facto leader of our group of 4, my sister, Emily, joined us, along with our 2 closest friends, Jake and Sarah. We'd planned this trip for months, eager to challenge ourselves and escape the monotony of our everyday lives. We had heard whispers of the mountain's eerie reputation, but like most urban adventurers, we dismissed them as local folklore. The journey began beautifully, with bright skies and crisp mountain air. We skied through powdery snowfields, laughed around campfires, and marveled at the vastness of the Wyoming wilderness. But by the 3rd day, the weather turned. Clouds gathered like silent sentinels, and the wind howled, carrying with it the promise of a brutal storm. By nightfall, the storm was upon us. Snow fell in relentless waves, blanketing the ground faster than we could clear it. Unable to see more than a few feet ahead, We decided to set up camp and wait for the storm to pass. Our tents offered little warmth against the biting cold, but they were our only refuge. Inside the tent, we huddled together, listening to the storm rage outside. The wind screeched like a living thing, and the fabric of the tent flapped violently. Despite the chaos, we managed to drift into a restless sleep, lulled by exhaustion. It was during the dead of night that I woke to a strange sound, a faint, melodic voice cutting through the wind. At first, I thought it was the storm playing tricks on my ears, but the voice grew louder, carrying a sorrowful tune that sent chills down my spine. I nudged Jake, who stirred groggily. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. He nodded, his face pale. "It sounds like singing." We peeked outside, our flashlights slicing through the swirling snow. That's when we saw her, a lone figure, an elderly woman, walking slowly through the storm. She wore a thin, tattered dress, completely out of place in the brutal cold. Her gray hair billowed in the wind, and though we couldn't see her face clearly, something about her presence was deeply unsettling. "Hello," Emily called out, her voice trembling. "Do you need help?" The woman didn't respond. She continued walking, her steps deliberate, as if drawn by an unseen force. We watched, frozen in place, as she disappeared into the white abyss of the storm. "Did that just happen?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "We can't just let her wander out there," Jake said, grabbing his coat. But as we debated what to do, the storm intensified, making it impossible to follow her trail. Reluctantly, we returned to the tent. Though none of us could sleep, the image of the woman lingered in our minds, her sorrowful song echoing in the silence. The storm subsided by morning, leaving the landscape eerily calm. As we stepped outside, the snow sparkled under the pale sunlight, but something felt wrong. That's when we noticed the footprints, small, precise, leading from the edge of our campsite to a nearby hill. The tracks didn't lead back, as if the woman had simply vanished. Curiosity overpowered our fear, and we followed the trail. It led us to a small, unmarked grave, half buried in snow. The headstone was worn and faded, but we could make out a name, Eleanor Gray. The description matched the woman we had seen in the storm. "This has to be some kind of coincidence," Sarah murmured, though her voice betrayed her disbelief. Jake shook his head, his breath visible in the cold air. "We all saw her. How do you explain this?" The silence that followed was heavier than the snow. None of us had an answer. The air around the grave felt colder, as if the earth itself mourned the forgotten soul buried there. We stood there for what felt like an eternity before the growing unease urged us to leave. As we packed up our gear, the storm clouds began to gather again. The wind picked up, carrying with it faint echoes of the melody we had heard the night before. It was then we realized that we were not alone, that the mountains held secrets far older and darker than we could comprehend. The trek back to civilization was grueling, but we moved quickly, driven by an unshakable sense of dread. Each gust of wind felt like a whisper, each shadow in the snow a reminder of the woman we had encountered. When we finally reached the base of the mountain, we swore never to speak of what had happened, as if silence could protect us from whatever lingered in those icy peaks. Years later, I still find myself haunted by that night. Who was Eleanor Gray? Why did her spirit wander the storm? And what tragedy had bound her to those unforgiving mountains? I've searched for answers, combed through old records and local legends, but all I've found are fragments of a story lost to time. Some nights, when the wind howls outside my window and the snow falls heavy, I think of her. I imagine her walking through the storm, her song carrying a sadness too deep for words. I wonder if she's still out there, waiting for someone to find her, to remember her name, to end her sorrow. If you ever find yourself in the Wyoming wilderness during a snowstorm, listen closely. You might hear her song, faint and mournful, carried on the wind. And if you see her, an elderly woman walking alone through the snow, don't follow. Some mysteries are better left undisturbed, their answers buried beneath the frost and the silence of forgotten graves. Story number 3. The Vanishing Tent. Winter in Montana is a silent predator. The snow blankets the landscape in an unyielding white, masking the treacherous terrains and concealing secrets that thrive in the frozen darkness. In the winter of 1992, my friend Jake and I decided to escape the chaos of city life by embarking on a camping trip to the remote high plains of Montana. Little did we know, our quest for solitude would lead us into a nightmare that would forever alter our perception of the wilderness. I'm Mark Harris, a freelance journalist with a penchant for adventure and a curiosity that often lands me in precarious situations. Jake, my college roommate and fellow thrill-seeker, shared my love for the outdoors. We had heard tales of the high plains, stories of endless snowfields, howling winds, and the eerie silence that enveloped the land. But we dismissed them as mere folklore, remnants of a bygone era that had lost their relevance in the modern world. Our journey began in late November, the air crisp with the onset of winter. We rented a sturdy all-terrain vehicle and packed our gear meticulously. Tents, sleeping bags, cooking supplies, and enough provisions to last us a week. The drive to the high plains was long, the roads winding through dense forests and over frozen rivers, each mile bringing us closer to our secluded campsite. By the time we reached our destination, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the pristine snow. We set up our tents with practiced efficiency, the rhythmic motions a comforting routine amidst the vastness of the wilderness. As night fell, we built a campfire, the flames flickering brightly against the encroaching darkness. The warmth of the fire was a welcome respite from the biting cold, and we settled into our evening with hot cocoa and light-hearted conversation. The first few days were idyllic. We hiked through snow-laden trails, marveled at the untouched beauty around us, and enjoyed the tranquility that only the high plains could offer. The nights were peaceful, the silence broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant call of a lone owl. But as the days grew shorter and the nights longer, an uneasy tension began to settle over us, an unspoken fear that something was amiss. It was on the 4th night that the first signs of the nightmare began to emerge. The storm had been brewing for days, the weather forecasts predicting heavy snowfall and fierce winds. As dusk turned to dark, the wind picked up speed, sending snowflakes swirling in chaotic patterns around our campsite. We huddled closer to the fire, trying to maintain warmth as the storm raged outside. Around midnight, a piercing scream shattered the fragile peace of our tent. Jake bolted upright, his eyes wide with terror. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, his voice trembling. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. The scream had been unlike anything I'd ever heard. A raw, anguished cry that echoed through the night. "We need to check it out," I insisted, grabbing my flashlight. Jake hesitated, fear etched on his face. "Are you crazy? It's a blizzard out there. We could get lost." But the scream had already set our hearts racing. Reluctantly, he nodded, and we unzipped the tent, stepping out into the storm. The wind howled like a wounded beast, the snow reducing visibility to mere feet. We followed the direction of the scream, the cold biting at our skin and numbing our fingers. After what felt like hours, we reached the edge of our campsite, but there was no sign of anyone. Only the swirling snow and the oppressive silence that followed. Confusion turned to dread as we realized that our tents were exactly where we had left them. No footprints, no disturbances, nothing to indicate that anyone had been here except for the lingering echo of that horrifying scream. We returned to the tent, our minds racing with questions and fear. The next morning, the storm had subsided, leaving behind a serene yet eerie calm. As we began to pack up our gear, we noticed something that sent chills down our spines. A series of large, unusual footprints leading away from our tent and disappearing into a nearby mountain crevice. The footprints were unlike any we had seen before, massive, with elongated toes and deep impressions that suggested they were made by something or someone unnaturally strong. "We need to leave," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This place isn't safe anymore." We hurried to pack, the fear of the unknown gripping us tightly. As we loaded the last of our gear, the footprints reappeared, circling our campsite before vanishing into the depths of the crevice. Panic set in as we realized that something or someone was out there, watching us, lurking in the shadows of the high plains. That night, as we sat around the dwindling fire, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The wind had died down, but the sense of being watched persisted, an invisible presence that seemed to press down on us with unrelenting force. The sky was a blanket of stars, but the tranquility was deceptive, the silence filled with the weight of our fears. As midnight approached, the fire began to flare up uncontrollably, the flames dancing with an intensity that was almost supernatural. We tried to dampen the fire, pouring water and covering it with snow, but nothing seemed to quell its fury. The heat became oppressive, the smoke thick and acrid, making it difficult to breathe. "We need to move," I said, grabbing Jake's arm. "We can't stay here." But as we attempted to leave, the snow around us began to shift and swirl, as if the very land was conspiring against us. The footprints reappeared, moving towards our tent with deliberate intent, leading us away from safety and deeper into the wilderness. The storm that had seemed to abate earlier returned with a vengeance, the wind howling like a chorus of lost souls. Panic set in as we realized we were being led away, trapped in a never-ending loop of fear and confusion. The footprints continued to guide us, the path leading to nowhere, the snow consuming our tracks as quickly as they were made. Desperation clawed at our sanity as we stumbled through the blinding snow, the landscape around us becoming a distorted maze of white and shadows. Hours turned into days as we struggled to survive, the storm relentless and the footprints our only guide, or perhaps our greatest torment. Food dwindled, our spirits faltered, and the isolation pressed in on us like an invisible weight. The high plains seemed to stretch into infinity, the boundaries of reality and nightmare blurring into a single, horrifying expanse. One night, exhausted and near the brink of despair, we stumbled upon a hidden crevice similar to the one where we first found the footprints. The snow had piled high, but we could see an outline of something beneath the surface, an old, abandoned cabin, its wooden structure barely visible through the thick blanket of snow. Hope surged within us as we approached, the promise of shelter and answers driving us forward despite our fear. The cabin was eerie in its silence, the windows dark and cold, the door hanging loosely on its hinges. We entered cautiously, the air inside thick with the scent of decay and abandonment. The interior was frozen in time, remnants of past lives scattered across the floor, rusted tools, broken furniture, and layers of snow that had accumulated over the years. As we explored, we found signs of a struggle, broken glass, torn fabric, and footprints leading deeper into the cabin, far too large for any human. Our flashlights flickered as we followed the trail, our hearts pounding with a mix of fear and determination. In the main room, we discovered a large, charred hearth, the remnants of a once thriving fire now reduced to ashes. But beneath the ashes, we saw a faint, pulsating glow emanating from a hidden compartment. Jake reached out hesitantly, pulling open the compartment to reveal an old, weathered journal. The pages were brittle, the ink faded, but the words were still legible. It was the diary of a man named Thomas Green, a hunter who had vanished on these very high plains years before. December 14th, 1990. The high plains are unforgiving, but I remain determined to uncover the secrets they hold. The spirits here are restless, their whispers carried by the wind. I feel their presence, watching, waiting. There's something ancient beneath the snow, something that should never be disturbed. As we read, the realization hit us hard. We were not the first to face the curse of the high plains. Thomas's words mirrored our own experiences, his fear and desperation echoing through time. We knew then that the only way to break free was to confront the curse head-on, to honor the spirits that had bound us to this endless winter. Gathering our remaining strength, we performed a ritual described in the journal, hoping to appease the restless spirits and lift the curse that had held us captive. The air around us crackled with energy as we chanted the ancient words, the snow swirling violently as the spirits responded to our efforts. The cabin began to tremble, the very earth beneath us shifting as the curse fought against our attempts to dismantle it. In a final, desperate act, we completed the ritual, the air filled with a blinding light that enveloped us in a warm embrace. The storm ceased abruptly, the snow calming into a gentle fall that mirrored the newfound peace. The footprints vanished, leaving behind only the memory of our ordeal and the promise of freedom from the high plains' eternal winter. As dawn broke, we emerged from the cabin, the first rays of sunlight piercing through the clearing. The high plains, once a desolate expanse of fear and... Story number 4. Whispers from the Deep Woods. Winter in North Dakota is a time when the landscape transforms into a vast, silent expanse of white. The biting cold and endless nights create an atmosphere of isolation that can weigh heavily on even the most resilient souls. In 2010, my family and I decided to escape the chaos of everyday life by embarking on a camping trip deep into the remote forests of North Dakota. Little did we know, our quest for tranquility would lead us into the heart of a nightmare that would haunt us forever. I'm David Lawson, a father of 2 and an avid outdoor enthusiast. My wife, Emily, shares my love for nature, and our children, Anna and Jake, were eager to experience the wilderness firsthand. We had heard stories about the pristine beauty of North Dakota's forests, but we were oblivious to the darker legends that lingered in the shadows of the trees. Our journey began in late November, the days growing shorter and the nights colder with each passing mile. We drove for hours, the snow-covered roads winding through dense forests and over frozen lakes, until we reached our destination, a secluded clearing surrounded by towering pines and thick underbrush. Setting up our campsite was a familiar routine, the rhythmic motions of pitching tents and gathering firewood, providing a sense of comfort amidst the vastness of the wilderness. As dusk settled, we built a campfire, the flames flickering against the encroaching darkness. The warmth of the fire was a welcome respite from the chill, and we settled into our evening with hot cocoa and light-hearted conversation. The first few nights were peaceful, the only sounds being the crackling of the fire and the occasional call of a distant owl. Anna and Jake played quietly outside, their laughter echoing softly through the trees. On the third night, however, the tranquility was shattered by an unexpected storm. The wind howled through the pines, and snow began to fall in heavy, relentless sheets, quickly transforming our campsite into a snow-covered refuge. We huddled together inside the tent, the storm raging outside, feeling the isolation of our chosen sanctuary pressing in on us. It was during this tumultuous night that we first heard the strange lullaby. First, it was barely audible, a soft, melodic hum that seemed to drift through the layers of snow and ice. Anna, ever the sensitive one, was the first to notice. "Daddy, do you hear that?" she whispered, her eyes wide with concern. I strained to listen, the wind muffling the sound. But gradually, the melody became clearer. It was hauntingly beautiful, a sorrowful tune that seemed to carry an otherworldly quality. Emily tried to reassure Anna, but the unease settled over us all like a heavy blanket. As the night wore on, the singing grew louder, the footsteps of the melody seeming to move closer to our tent. The lullaby was accompanied by the faint sound of footsteps crunching in the snow, circling our campsite with deliberate intent. Fear began to grip us, the realization that we were not alone dawning on our minds. "We need to stay calm," Emily urged, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "It's probably just the wind or some animal." But the melody persisted, the footsteps now unmistakable, leading towards our tent from all directions. Anna clung to my arm, her small frame shaking with fear. "Please don't come here," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm's fury. I nodded, trying to muster the courage to face whatever or whoever was approaching us. "We're safe inside," I said, attempting to sound reassuring. "Stay with us." Despite our efforts to remain calm, the fear was palpable, each creak and snap of the tent amplifying our anxiety. The lullaby seemed to seep into our very souls, its sorrowful notes resonating with a deep, unspoken pain. It was as if the forest itself was crying out, mourning something lost in the frozen expanse. As the first light of dawn broke through the storm, the singing ceased abruptly, leaving behind an oppressive silence that felt heavier than the night's earlier chaos. We emerged from our tent, the snow having settled into a serene blanket that erased most of the night's turmoil. Relief washed over us, tempered by the lingering fear of the unknown presence that had haunted our night. But our peace was short-lived. The next morning, we discovered a series of small footprints leading from the edge of our campsite and disappearing into the depths of the forest. The footprints were unlike any we had seen before, tiny, delicate, almost ethereal in their appearance. They led straight to our tent, circling it before vanishing without a trace. Confusion and unease settled in as we tried to make sense of the footprints. Who or what would leave these? Tom, a friend who had joined us for the trip, questioned, his brow furrowed in concern. Emily inspected the footprints closely, her fingers tracing the intricate patterns. "They look almost otherworldly," she mused, her voice tinged with both curiosity and fear. As the days passed, the footprints became a haunting reminder of our encounter. Each night, we heard the distant melody once more, though never as prominently as before. The fear that had once gripped us began to resurface, the stories of the forest's restless spirits echoing in our minds. Determined to uncover the truth behind the haunting lullaby and the mysterious footprints, we delved into the local legends and folklore. We discovered tales of lost souls who had perished in the unforgiving winter, their spirits bound to the forest, eternally searching for peace. According to the legends, the lullaby was a cry for help, a sorrowful melody that sought to guide the lost spirits to their final rest. One evening, as the first snows of the new winter began to fall, we decided to confront the mystery head-on. Armed with lanterns and a sense of purpose, we ventured deeper into the forest, following the trail of footprints that had haunted us. The cold was biting, the snow swirling around us like a living entity, but our determination kept us moving forward. Hours passed as we navigated the dense woods, the footprints leading us to a secluded glade where the trees formed a natural circle around a small, frozen pond. In the center stood a solitary figure, a man, his form shrouded in darkness, his eyes hollow and filled with eternal sorrow. He stood motionless, the same haunting melody emanating from his presence. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. The figure turned slowly, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that pierced through the cold night air. "I am but a shadow of what once was," he replied, his voice a haunting echo of the lullaby. "Bound by sorrow, trapped by the winter's embrace." Emily stepped forward, her voice gentle yet resolute. "We mean you no harm. We're here to help you find peace." The man's gaze softened slightly, the sorrow in his eyes reflecting a deep, unending pain. "The curse was not mine alone," he whispered. "It is the forest's, the winter's, the land's. To break free, you must honor the lost, remember their stories, and carry their memories with you." Understanding dawned on me. The spirits were trapped, their suffering a result of forgotten lives and untold stories. To free them, we had to acknowledge their existence, preserve their memories, and show respect for the lives they once led. We spent the night in the glade, sharing stories of the lost souls, honoring their lives and sacrifices. The man watched silently, his presence growing less oppressive as we connected with the spirits of the forest. As dawn broke, The first light of spring began to pierce through the lingering snow, signaling a new beginning. The haunting lullaby ceased, replaced by the soft whispers of gratitude carried by the morning breeze. The man in the shadows began to fade, his form dissolving into the light as the curse that had held him and the other lost souls was finally lifted. We returned to our campsite with a sense of fulfillment and peace, the footprints having guided us to a resolution that brought closure to the restless spirits. The forest, once a place of fear and isolation, now felt alive with a sense of harmony and respect. Years have passed since that fateful winter, but the memory of Frostwood Ridge and the haunting lullaby remains a poignant reminder of the delicate balance between humanity and nature. Our encounter with the lost souls taught us the importance of honoring the past, respecting the land, and listening to the silent whispers that echo through the wilderness. Sometimes, when the winter winds howl through the trees and the snow begins to fall, I find myself reflecting on that night, the haunting melody, the shadowy figure, and the trail of footprints linger in my mind, a ghostly echo of a time when we faced the unknown and found a way to bring peace to the restless spirits of the deep woods. If you ever find yourself venturing into the remote forests of North Dakota during the dead of winter, remember the story of Frostwood Ridge. Respect the land, honor its legends, and listen to the silent songs that call from the depths of the snow-covered wilderness. For in the heart of the forest, amidst the whispers of the lost, lies a story of sorrow, redemption, and the enduring power of memory. Story number 5. Eternal Flame, The Curse of Frostwood Ridge. Winter in Vermont is both a beauty and a beast. The snow-covered pines stand tall against the gray sky, their branches heavy with ice, creating a serene yet formidable landscape. In January of 1977, my friends and I decided to escape the hustle of city life and embark on a camping trip to Frostwood Ridge, a secluded spot known for its breathtaking views and, according to local legend, its mysterious happenings. I'm Mike Thompson, an aspiring writer with a fascination for the supernatural. My friends Sarah, Tom, and Lisa were seasoned outdoors enthusiasts, always up for an adventure. We had heard the stories about Frostwood Ridge, tales of unexplained lights, eerie sounds in the dead of night, and a particular legend about an unextinguishable fire that had driven previous campers away in terror. Naturally, we were intrigued rather than deterred. We arrived at the ridge on a crisp December afternoon, the air sharp with the promise of snow. Setting up our tents was routine, our movements practiced and efficient. As dusk approached, we built a campfire, the flames dancing merrily against the encroaching darkness. The warmth was comforting, and we settled into a rhythm of storytelling and laughter, the flickering firelight casting playful shadows on our faces. The first night was uneventful, save for the occasional crackle of the fire and the distant howl of a wolf. We shared ghost stories, each tale more elaborate than the last, fueling our imaginations. As the night deepened, the temperature plummeted, the wind picking up speed and sending snowflakes swirling around our campsite. Around midnight, the atmosphere shifted. The fire, once a gentle glow, began to flare up uncontrollably. Flames leaped higher, crackling with an intensity that was almost unnatural. We exchanged worried glances, trying to dampen the fire with our jackets and blankets. But nothing seemed to work. The heat became oppressive, the smoke thick and acrid, making it difficult to breathe. "Something's wrong," Tom muttered, his voice strained as he fumbled for water to pour onto the flames. But the water sizzled and evaporated instantly, leaving the fire unaffected. Panic set in as we realized the fire was beyond our control. "We need to leave," Sarah insisted, her eyes wide with fear. "It's not safe here anymore." Reluctantly, we decided to abandon our campsite, grabbing whatever we could carry and heading into the storm. The wind howled like a living entity, the snow reducing our visibility to mere feet. Every step was a battle against the relentless elements, our breath visible in the frigid air as we struggled to find shelter. After what felt like hours, we stumbled upon a small, abandoned cabin nestled between two pines. The structure was weathered, the windows cracked and covered in frost, but it offered a semblance of refuge from the storm. We hurried inside, our clothes soaked and our bodies shivering from the cold. As we settled into the cramped space, the eerie silence was broken by the distant sound of footsteps crunching through the snow. We froze, hearts pounding, listening intently. The footsteps circled the cabin, stopping occasionally as if someone or something was pacing just beyond our walls. "Did you hear that?" Lisa whispered, clutching her blanket tightly. Before anyone could respond, the door to the cabin slammed shut with a force that sent chills down our spines. The temperature inside plummeted further, the air growing thick with an unexplainable presence. The footsteps resumed, louder and more deliberate, echoing through the small space. "We need to get out," Tom urged, grabbing his flashlight. "Now." But as we approached the door, we found it locked from the outside. No matter how hard we pounded or pulled, desperation set in as the footsteps grew closer, accompanied by a low, mournful wail that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the cabin. Suddenly, the room was filled with an otherworldly glow. The walls shimmered, revealing ghostly apparitions, figures frozen in time, their eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. Among them stood a man, his form translucent yet distinct, staring at us with an expression of eternal anguish. "You should not have come here," he intoned, his voice echoing unnaturally around the room. "This place is cursed." "We mean no harm," I replied, my voice barely steady. "We're just trying to survive the storm." The apparition's eyes bore into mine, and I felt a wave of despair wash over me. "The fire you ignited was not of this world," he said. "It was a beacon, a signal to the restless spirits bound to Frostwood Ridge. Now, you are part of the curse." The temperature dropped further, and the apparitions began to move towards us, their presence overwhelming. We backed away, but the room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in as the spirits surrounded us. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and decay, the oppressive weight of the curse making it difficult to breathe. In a desperate attempt to break free, I remembered the journal my grandfather had given me, a collection of local legends and rituals meant to protect against malevolent forces. Flipping through the pages, I found a passage that spoke of breaking curses through understanding and respect. "We have to appease them," I shouted over the cacophony, my mind racing to remember the exact words. "We didn't know it was cursed. Please, let us go." The apparition regarded me thoughtfully, his expression softening slightly. "To lift the curse, you must honor the spirits you have disturbed. Light a new fire, but this time, with respect and remembrance for those who have fallen." Understanding dawned on me. We needed to show reverence for the spirits, to acknowledge their presence and their suffering. Summoning our remaining strength, we gathered what little we had left and started a new fire, this time slower and more deliberate. As the flames danced, we spoke softly, sharing stories of the lost souls and honoring their memories. The apparitions watched silently, their forms becoming less defined as the fire burned brightly. The temperature began to rise, the oppressive presence lifting as the spirits found solace in our respect. The man who had confronted us nodded solemnly, a gesture of acceptance before his form faded into the light. The door to the cabin swung open effortlessly. The barrier between us and the storm lifted. We stepped outside into the first light of dawn, the snow now calm and peaceful. The only trace of the night's horrors was the blackened circle on the snow where our original fire had been, a silent reminder of the curse we had encountered. As we packed up our gear and prepared to leave Frostwood Ridge, a profound sense of relief washed over us. The storm had passed, and the curse had been lifted through our understanding and respect. We drove away with the memories of that night etched into our minds, a story we would never forget. Years later, the legend of Frostwood Ridge remains a cautionary tale among campers and locals alike. The story of the unextinguishable fire and the restless spirits serves as a reminder of the thin line between curiosity and reverence, and the importance of respecting the forces that lie beyond our understanding. Sometimes, when the winter winds howl through the pines and the snow blankets the ridge once more, I find myself thinking back to that night, the eerie silence, the ghostly apparitions, and the blackened circle on the snow linger in my mind, a haunting echo of the curse that was both terrifying and transformative. If you ever find yourself camping in the remote wilderness of Vermont, remember the tale of Frostwood Ridge. Respect the land, honor its legends, and approach with humility, for some fires are not meant to be ignited, and some curses can only be lifted through understanding and reverence. Story number 6. The Man in the Shadows. Winter in the Colorado Rockies is a formidable beast. By December, the landscape is transformed into a vast expanse of white, where every tree branch is weighed down with snow and the silence is so profound it presses against your ears. In 2005, my wife, Laura, and I decided to escape the cacophony of city life and seek solace in the heart of this frozen wilderness. We had always cherished our annual camping trips, but this year felt different, charged with an unspoken tension neither of us could quite name. Our campsite was nestled between two towering pines, the ground beneath us blanketed with fresh snow that glistened under the weak winter sun. The air was crisp, each breath a visible puff that lingered before dissipating into the cold. We spent our days hiking through the snow-laden trails, marveling at the untouched beauty around us, and our nights huddled together in our tent, sharing stories and watching the stars flicker through the thin fabric. On the third night, as the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness enveloped the mountains, a fierce snowstorm began to brew. The wind howled through the trees, sending snow swirling in chaotic patterns around our tent. We sat close to our portable heater, trying to maintain a semblance of warmth as the storm raged outside. The howling wind created an eerie symphony, each gust sounding like a whisper from the depths of the wilderness. Around midnight, as the storm reached its peak, Laura and I were jolted awake by an unsettling noise, soft, deliberate footsteps crunching through the snow. At first, we dismissed it as the wind playing tricks on our minds, but the sound persisted, growing louder and more distinct. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached for my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness in search of the source. There, just a few meters from our tent, stood the shadow of a man, tall and slender. His form was cloaked in darkness, making it impossible to discern any features. He stood motionless, as if waiting for something or someone. Laura clutched my arm, her eyes wide with fear. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I nodded, unable to tear my gaze away from the spectral figure. Summoning all my courage, I shouted, "Who's there?" My voice echoed through the still night, swallowed almost immediately by the storm. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, as quickly as he had appeared, the shadow dissolved into the swirling snow, leaving us alone once more. We rushed outside, our flashlights scanning the empty landscape for any sign of the mysterious man. Instead of finding him, we discovered a series of large footprints leading directly to our tent. Confusion and fear mingled within us. Why were the footprints pointing towards us? Had the figure been trying to communicate? Or was this some sort of warning? "What the hell is going on?" Laura asked, her breath visible in the frigid air. I examined the footprints closely. They were unlike any we had seen before, too large to be human, with elongated toes that seemed to grip the snow with unnatural precision. And yet, there were no tracks leading away from the tent, as if whatever had made them had vanished without a trace. The rest of the night was a blur of anxiety and restless sleep. Every creak of the tent and every gust of wind amplified our fears, making the oppressive silence feel almost alive. We huddled together, trying to make sense of the inexplicable events. But sleep remained elusive, the shadows of our thoughts dancing just beyond our grasp. The following morning, the storm had subsided, Leaving behind a pristine, undisturbed blanket of snow, we decided to pack up and leave, eager to put the strange encounter behind us. As we made our way to our vehicles, we couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The footprints around our tent remained, stark against the white landscape, a silent testament to the night's horrors. Determined to find answers, we returned to town and spoke with the locals. The village was small, the kind where everyone knew each other's business, and secrets were hard to keep. We learned that Frostbite Ridge, the area where we had camped, was notorious for its legends and ghost stories. One in particular stood out, a tale of a man named Elias who had vanished on a stormy night decades earlier. According to the legend, Elias had been a recluse, known for his erratic behavior and mysterious disappearances. Some believed he had been cursed, forever trapped between the realms of the living and the dead. As the days passed, Laura and I couldn't escape the images of that shadowy figure and the unnerving footprints. Sleep eluded us, replaced by a growing obsession to uncover the truth behind Frostbite Ridge. We revisited our campsite, searching for any clues that might explain the inexplicable. But the snow had covered everything, erasing any signs of our presence, or so it seemed. One evening, a week after our return, we received a phone call that sent chills down our spines. It was Mike, one of our close friends who had visited us shortly before our trip. His voice was frantic, barely coherent. "Lars, something's wrong. I saw him again. The man in the shadows." We rushed to his house, finding him in a state of panic. He recounted his experience in vivid detail, how, during a winter hike, he had encountered the same shadowy figure, followed by the appearance of similar footprints, and just like us, he had felt an overwhelming sense of dread, driving him to abandon his hike and seek refuge. The trio of sightings, ours, Mike's, and those of others, began to weave a pattern that was both terrifying and impossible to ignore. It was as if Frostbite Ridge was a focal point for something beyond our understanding, a place where the veil between worlds was thin and easily breached. Determined to confront the source of these apparitions, Laura and I decided to return to Frostbite Ridge, armed with equipment and a newfound resolve. The town had grown quieter, the residents avoiding the cursed area as the winter deepened. We set out early one morning, the sky a pale gray, the snow untouched and pristine. As we approached the ridge, the atmosphere felt heavier, the air thick with an unseen presence. The trees stood silent, their branches etched against the sky like skeletal fingers. We reached our campsite, the footprints still present, leading towards the denser part of the forest. Taking a deep breath, we ventured into the heart of Frostbite Ridge. The only sounds our footsteps crunching in the snow and the distant call of a lone owl. Hours passed without incident, the silence oppressive and unyielding. Just as we began to question our decision, the same shadowy figure appeared, standing a few meters from our path. Our hearts raced as we froze in place, mirroring the terror that had gripped us the first time. We exchanged glances, the unspoken agreement clear: this was the moment of confrontation. "Why are you haunting us?" I demanded, my voice steadier than I felt. The shadow remained silent, his form wavering like mist in the wind. Suddenly, the air grew colder, our breaths visible as they mingled with the snowflakes. A deep, sorrowful sigh echoed through the ridge, and the figure began to dissolve once more, leaving behind the haunting silence. Frustration and fear surged through us, but the sight of the footprints led us onward, deeper into the forest. We followed them until we reached a clearing, the remnants of an old cabin half buried in snow. The footprints ended abruptly at the entrance, with no indication of where they had led. Inside, the cabin was dark and abandoned, the remnants of past lives scattered across the floor. As we explored, a chilling realization dawned upon us. We were being watched. The air grew thick with an oppressive presence, the shadows within the cabin seeming to move with a life of their own. We found a journal, its pages filled with entries from Elias, detailing his descent into madness and his desperate attempts to break the curse that bound him to Frostbite Ridge. December 3rd, 1947. I can feel them watching, whispering in the wind. The shadows have a mind of their own, guiding me deeper into the ridge. If anyone finds this, heed my warning. Leave now, before it's too late. December 10th, 1947. The curse tightens with each passing day. The shadows are relentless, pulling me further into the darkness. I fear I will never escape the eternal winter that binds me here. The journal ended abruptly, the final pages torn and smeared with what looked like old, dried blood. The realization that Elias had never escaped was a heavy burden, the weight of his curse pressing down on us. We knew then that the only way to free ourselves and Elias was to confront the source of his torment. Gathering our courage, Laura and I performed a ritual described in the journal, hoping to break the curse and lay Elias's spirit to rest. The air around us crackled with energy as we chanted the ancient words, the shadows responding to our efforts. The temperature dropped further, the snow swirling violently as the curse fought back against our attempts to dismantle it. As the final words left our lips, a blinding light enveloped the clearing, and the oppressive presence lifted, replaced by a profound sense of peace. The shadowy figure of Elias appeared one last time. His form softened, eyes filled with gratitude and relief. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice fading as he dissolved into the snowflakes. The storm within the ridge subsided, the snow calming into a gentle fall that mirrored the newfound tranquility. We stood there in silence, the weight of our ordeal lifting as we realized the curse had been broken. The footprints around us began to fade, disappearing into the pristine snow, leaving behind only the memory of our harrowing experience. Returning to town, we were met with a mix of relief and curiosity. The sightings had ceased, and the curse that had plagued Frostbite Ridge for decades was no more. Our story became a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of confronting the unknown with courage and determination. Years have passed since that fateful winter, but the memory of Frostbite Ridge remains etched in my mind. The mountains stand tall and silent, their beauty now unmarred by the shadows that once haunted them. Laura and I continue our annual camping trips, always mindful of the thin veil that separates our world from the supernatural forces that linger in the wilderness. Sometimes, on particularly cold nights, I find myself gazing towards Frostbite Ridge, the memory of the shadowy figure and the footprints lingering like a ghostly echo. It's a reminder that some places hold secrets too profound to ignore, their mysteries forever woven into the fabric of the natural world. If you ever find yourself venturing into the remote wilderness of Colorado during the dead of winter, heed the warnings of those who have faced the shadows before you. Respect the land, honor its legends, and remember that in the heart of the snow and silence lies a story of redemption and the enduring power of love and courage. Story number 7. Whispers in the Snow. Winter in Alaska is a realm where the very essence of survival is tested. The relentless cold, the unforgiving wilderness, and the sheer isolation combine to create an environment that demands respect and resilience. In the winter of 1998, a group of friends, Mark, Sarah, Tom, Lisa, and me, decided to challenge ourselves by embarking on a camping trip deep into the Alaskan wilderness. Little did we know, our adventure would plunge us into a nightmare from which we might never escape. I'm Daniel Mitchell, the unofficial leader of our tight-knit group. We had all grown up hearing stories of the wild, untamed beauty of Alaska, tales of shimmering auroras and vast, silent expanses of snow. Yet, there was another side to these stories, whispers of something more sinister that lurked beneath the pristine surface. Our journey began in early December, the days short and the nights long. We drove for hours, the snow-covered roads winding through dense forests and over towering mountains. The further we ventured, the more isolated we felt, the nearest town a distant memory. By the time we set up camp, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving us in darkness save for the faint glow of our lanterns. The first night was peaceful, the silence of the wilderness broken only by the occasional howl of a distant wolf. We sat around the fire, sharing stories and laughing, the warmth of the flames a comforting barrier against the biting cold. As the night deepened, the temperature plummeted, and the snow began to fall in thick, heavy flakes, blanketing our campsite in a serene, yet eerie stillness. It was around midnight that we first heard it, the faint sound of footsteps crunching through the snow. At first, we dismissed it as the wind playing tricks on our ears, or perhaps a small animal venturing out into the night. But the sound persisted, growing louder and more deliberate, circling our tent in a haunting rhythm. "Did you guys hear that?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with unease. Mark nodded, his usually confident demeanor shaken. "Probably just a deer or something. Let's not worry about it." But as the footsteps continued, an unsettling feeling settled over us. The sound seemed to come closer, then recede, only to repeat the cycle. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows on our tents, making the dark wilderness around us feel alive with unseen presence. Tom, ever the skeptic, decided to investigate. "I'm going to check it out," he said, grabbing his flashlight and stepping out into the snow. The rest of us watched as he disappeared into the night, his figure swallowed by the swirling snowflakes. Minutes passed with no sign of Tom, the only sound the relentless whisper of the storm. Growing worried, Lisa and I followed, the cold seeping into our bones as we trudged through the deepening snow. We called out his name, our voices barely audible over the howling wind. But there was no response. We reached the perimeter of our campsite, the footprints of our group indistinguishable in the fresh snow. The footprints leading towards the forest were the only evidence that Tom had ventured further. Panic clawed at my chest as we hastily made our way back, searching every inch of our campsite for any sign of him. There was nothing, no tent disturbed, no gear moved. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Shaken, we returned to our tent, the silence now oppressive. The storm raged on, the snow piling higher around us, isolating us further from the world. We huddled together, trying to shake off the fear, but the memory of Tom's disappearance lingered like a dark cloud over our hearts. The next morning, the storm had subsided, leaving behind a landscape transformed by the night's fury. The snow lay thick and undisturbed, the world painted in shades of white and gray. As we unpacked our gear, an eerie discovery awaited us: large, unusual footprints encircling our campsite, leading deep into the forest. They were unlike anything we had seen before, massive, with elongated toes and an otherworldly symmetry that suggested they weren't made by any known animal or human. "Where did these come from?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling with fear. Mark inspected the footprints closely, his face pale. "They weren't here last night, and they're not like any footprints I've ever seen." The realization hit us hard. We were not alone. The footprints hinted at something or someone that had been with us, lurking in the shadows of the wilderness. The legends of haunted lands and restless spirits resurfaced in our minds. Tales we had once dismissed as mere folklore now taking on a chilling reality. Determined to find answers, we decided to follow the footprints, hoping they would lead us to Tom or at least explain the mysterious presence that had plagued our night. Equipped with our gear and a sense of dread, we ventured into the heart of the forest, the footprints guiding us deeper into the unknown. The forest was a labyrinth of snow-covered trees, the branches heavy with ice, creaking under the weight. The silence was deafening, the only sounds our footsteps and the distant whisper of the wind. As we followed the trail, the footprints began to disappear into the dense thicket, swallowed by the relentless snowfall. Frustration mounted as we struggled to maintain our path, the cold numbing our fingers and clouding our thoughts. It was then that we stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin, its wooden structure battered by the storm, windows shattered and doors hanging ajar. The footprints led directly to the entrance, a sign that whatever or whoever we were seeking had found refuge here. Summoning our courage, We approached the cabin, the air growing colder with each step. The door creaked ominously as we pushed it open, the interior dark and foreboding. The remnants of past occupants lay scattered, a broken chair, a shattered lantern, and in the center of the room, a single, untouched bed covered in fresh snow. Suddenly, a gust of wind slammed the door shut behind us, plunging the cabin into darkness. Our lantern flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced on the walls, making the space feel alive with unseen eyes. The temperature dropped further, our breaths visible in the frigid air as an oppressive silence settled over us. "We need to get out of here," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of our hearts. But as we turned to leave, we heard it, a faint, sorrowful wail echoing through the cabin, the sound of someone crying out in agony. The room seemed to warp around us, the walls closing in, the air thick with despair. Panic surged through us as we desperately tried to escape, but the door wouldn't budge, as if held shut by an unseen force. In the corner of the room, a shadowy figure began to materialize, a man, his form barely distinguishable in the dim light, eyes hollow and filled with eternal sorrow. He reached out towards us, his presence cold and menacing. "Why are you here?" he demanded, his voice a chilling whisper that sent shivers down our spines. "You should never have come." Before we could react, the figure dissolved into the air, the room returning to its silent, oppressive state. The door swung open on its own, and we fled the cabin, the weight of our fear propelling us forward. The footprints were gone, leaving us alone in the vast expanse of snow and silence. Breathless and shaken, we made our way back to our campsite, the memories of that night etched into our minds. The footprints around us were now gone, erased by the relentless snow, as if our ordeal had been wiped away by the wilderness itself. We packed up our gear in silence, the fear of the unknown making our movements mechanical and detached. As we prepared to leave, a lingering sense of dread settled over us, the unspoken fear that we had barely escaped something far more sinister than we could comprehend. Driving away from Frostwood, the snow-covered landscape fading in our rearview mirrors, we vowed never to return. The footprints, the vanished Tom, and the haunted cabin became a cautionary tale among our friends, a story of the thin veil that separates our world from the shadows that lurk within the wild. Years have passed since that harrowing winter, but the memory of those silent shadows and the whispers in the snow remain vivid in my mind. Frostwood stands as a testament to the untamed forces of nature and the dark legends that guard its secrets. We moved on with our lives, the scars of that night serving as a constant reminder of the fragility of our existence in the face of the unknown. Sometimes, when the wind howls through the trees and the snow begins to fall, I find myself glancing towards the horizon, the memory of Frostwood and the haunted footprints lingering like a ghostly echo. It's a chilling reminder that some places are better left untouched, their mysteries hidden beneath layers of snow and silence, waiting for the next group of curious souls to awaken their restless spirits. If you ever find yourself trekking through the remote wilderness of Alaska during the dead of winter, heed the warnings of those who have ventured before you. Respect the land, honor its legends, and remember that in the vast expanse of snow and silence, you are never truly alone.